Welcome to the weekly worship service of the First Church in Boston, a Unitarian Universalist congregation in Back Bay. First Church offers this broadcast each Sunday morning from 11 a.m. to noon here on 88.9 WERS. Our guest minister for today is Reverend Tom Schade. His sermon is entitled Heartbreak and Hope.
Good morning. Welcome this morning on Memorial Day weekend to the First Church in Boston. I am Tom Schade, a retired Unitarian Universalist minister, and I'm preaching today's message in the absence of my good friend Reverend Edmund Robinson, who has this Sunday off. Edmund, by the way, was, I believe, if I remember right, back in the murky depths of memory, in my startup class at the first. When you get your first settlement, they have a little week-long seminar at headquarters with all the new ministers, and I think Edmund was in my class then. I can't remember when I didn't know Edmund after I entered the ministry, so I'm delighted to have this chance to preach for him. We gather this morning on the Sunday of Memorial Day weekend, and tomorrow each of us in our own way will pay honor to those who died in the service of the United States of America. It's a day of sadness and of memory, a day which must inspire us to measure the purpose with which we live our own lives and ask ourselves those searching questions about where we place our ultimate values. It's also a weekend we cannot escape knowing, in which each of us in our own way are responding to the horrific violence by which 19 fourth graders and 2 teachers died in a mass shooting in Uvalde, Texas. That event too forces us to ask ourselves searching questions about where we place our ultimate values, how we understand our interdependence as human beings, and how we live our lives. On days like today, especially on days like today, we need to gather in worship. We need to remind ourselves, to take an hour out of the week to remind ourselves of what is most important, to sit in silence and to breathe, to listen more than to speak, to sing songs that name our dreams, dreams that are too wild to speak in ordinary tongue, to practice compassion, and to tend to our souls for the week and for the work that lies ahead. So come, let us worship together. I would like to start this morning by singing our opening hymn, O Come Ye Longing Thirsty Souls. The text is by Isaiah, and it is a hymn of liberation. And so it's number 209 in your gray hymnal. And please rise as you're able or so moved and join us in song.
Oh,
I'm James Quixote McConnell, your announcer and broadcast engineer. The music director at First Church is Gigi Mitchell Velasco, featured today on flute alongside pianist Robert Winkley. The prelude for today was Pavane by Gabriel Faure, and the postlude will be Peace in Classic Style by Gordon Young.
And is rekindled by another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude to those who have lit the flame within us. Our chalice lighting is from Albert Schweitzer. And please join as you're able with the affirmation of the First Church Boston, which is written in your order of service. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Your order of service says announcements, but I have none, so we'll move directly to Ellie Miller, chair of the Campaign Against Gun Violence.
"56 years ago, 17 people were killed in the tower shooting at the University of Texas. Since then, there have been 240-some mass shootings in just American schools. I cannot comprehend all the feelings of sadness and anger which were generated by these unnecessary deaths. But of course, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Mass shootings comprise only 1% of all gun deaths. The total numbers of firearm fatalities include about 124 people every day, or 45,000 a year. And there are an additional 90,000 injuries from guns each year. Guns are now the leading cause of death among children and adolescents in the US. As a society, we have failed the 19 children and 2 teachers from Uvalde. Our electorate and our legislators have failed all who live and die with this kind of trauma every day. But now we must honor them. By turning our grief into action, be a gun sense voter. Support the Mass Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence, or Moms Demand Action, or Every Town for Gun Safety. Know that the Brady legal team is in court every day, working to reform the corporate gun lobby and secure justice for the victims and survivors of gun violence. All these groups can give you hope and inform you what steps you might take to help this cause. Positive change can happen. Americans must continue to rally, march, and vote to ensure gun violence is no longer ignored.
The anthem for today is Sing Me to Heaven by Daniel Gothorpe. Our broadcast is brought to you from the Ken Orton Memorial Studio in honor of the original radio voice of First Church.
In my heart, sequestered
Our responsive reading is number 719 in your gray hymnal by George Eliot or Marianne Evans. Oh, may I join the choir invisible of those immortal dead who live again in minds made better by their presence. In thoughts sublime that pierce the night like stars, and with their mild persistence urge our search to vaster issues. That better self shall live till human time folds its eyelids, and the human sky be gathered like a scroll within the tomb. May I reach that purest heaven, to be to other souls the cup of strength in some great agony. Be the sweet presence of a good diffused, and in diffusion ever more intense. Let us join our hearts in the spirit of prayer and meditation. O Spirit of life and love, hear us today as a people gathered in worship. Today, we are mindful especially of death. Death that comes too early in life. We remember those who met death in battle. And we remember those who met death in the horrific situations of crime. And each of us remember our own losses on this weekend. So let this moment of memory be a moment of reawakening. A reawakening of compassion, of conscience. Strip from us our complacency and fatigue. Strip from us our inertia, our acceptance of what seems now to be inevitable. Make a way for us when it seems there is no way. We ask you this day to strengthen all those who carry the heavy burden of grief. And we ask you to lay your healing hand upon the hearts of all those who mourn. And may they mourn not as those without hope, but as those who are confident in the ultimate reconciliation of all humanity and God. Amen.
This is a reading from Laurie Carr, lawyer, founder of Revolutionary Love, and Sikh activist. Ms. Kaur is talking about the process of childbirth. You see, the stage called transition, it feels like dying, but it is the stage that precedes the birth of new life. And so birthing as a metaphor has begun to fill my imagination. You know how we say warrior on or soldier on. Only a subset of men for most of human history have had the experience of going to war. Yet we all know what it means to be brave enough to fight the good fight, right? So too, only a subset of women have had the experience of birthing or birthing that way. It is not special. It is very specific. It is distinct. It requires a certain kind of courage to create something new. And so the metaphor of birthing, I began to wonder if it may have something to offer all of us. And it has filled my mind and formed a question in me, a question that I have been asking every single day. What if? What if the darkness in our country right now, in the world right now, is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? What if our America is not dead, but a country still waiting to be born? What if all of our ancestors who pushed through the fire before us, who survived genocide and colonization, slavery, and sexual assault, what if they are standing behind us now, whispering in our ear, "You are brave, you are brave"? What if this is our time of great transition? I believe that we are convening at a time when our nation and our world are in transition. For as we speak, we are seeing the rise of far right-wing supremacist movements in this nation and around the world, propping up demagogues, mainstreaming nativism, undermining democracies, and politicizing the very notion of truth. We are at a crossroads. Will we birth a nation that has never been? A nation that is multiracial, multi-faith, multi-gendered, multicultural, a nation where power is shared and we strive to protect the dignity of every person? Or will we continue to descend into a kind of civil war, a power struggle with those who want to return America to a past where a certain class of white people hold cultural, economic, and political dominion? Is this the darkness of the tomb or the darkness of the womb?
You're listening to the Sunday worship service at First Church in Boston, Unitarian Universalist on WERS.
Join me in hymn number 34.
Amen.
heart's control. By this we worship and made whole. Thank you for inviting me to your pulpit, this deeply historic pulpit. I just have to tell you, not only, this is like, there's a lot of historical stuff going on here in my own life, some of which I'll get to, but I just have to tell you, Ellie Miller and I went to the same junior LRY and LRY group in Youngstown, Ohio, back when the earth was young. And all the animals spoke the same mother tongue. So not only this long association with Edmund, but now this long association with Ellie, the person who read, I've been associated with for a long time as well. The thing about a deeply oppressive, systematically racist society like ours is that whatever you love the most, whatever gives you the most pride, your most sense of belonging, your most sense of value, will infuriate you and ultimately break your heart. In this world, whatever you love the most will break your heart. For most of us, there's a part of our identity that makes us proud, that defines us positively. For many people, it's the story of their family. Maybe an old Yankee family that has been around for centuries and many branches. Maybe it's, let's just face it, maybe it's the church you go to, which has been around for centuries, a historic old church. I served a church in Worcester that was just formed in 1785, 150 years after you guys. And we were still pretty proud. It gave many people their meaning. Maybe what gives you your pride is the story of your immigrant family, starting with the grandfather or great-grandfather who came here and got a job in a factory and started you on the path, your family on the path to upward mobility. And maybe your family wasn't successful, but you take pride in their hard work and their persistence and their survival against great odds and barriers. Maybe what gives you your pride is your education, the old alma mater with its ivy-covered walls, or that you were just the first in your family to go to college. Maybe your pride comes from the fact that your family served in the armed forces of the United States and that somewhere tomorrow there will be a grave decorated with a flag. There's so many ways to locate yourself in this country and to locate yourself in its history. Now let me speak personally. We were a UU family growing up. And I will say that our religion was the most important thing in our lives. It's the most important part of our identity. We were not always UUs. Both my grandfathers were German Baptist ministers who spoke and preached in German to German-speaking congregations. But my parents became Unitarians right before I was born. In fact, my father was serving a Baptist church in Plymouth, Massachusetts, when he heard a sermon by the Reverend Charles Edward Park of this church, which so convinced him that he applied for fellowship with the American Unitarian Association. That was in 1947. So I grew up a Unitarian and then a Unitarian Universalist. It was what I loved. It was where my closest friends were. It's what gave me meaning. And it was in that I was most proud. It was my thread in the fabric of the United States. Its history became my history. It had meaning. It encompassed certain political and social values. Because I was a UU, I was taught to be tolerant. I was taught then to support the civil rights movement. I was taught to respect women and to view them as my equals, and that I should be opposed to violence in every form, and I should be engaged in my community. I should be idealistic. And I could be proud of living up to the demands of my faith. Now, for those who come in to Unitarian Universalism as adults, they often don't view it as a demanding faith, but if you grew up in this faith, it was demanding. So my faith formed me, and I remain disciplined by its requirements to this day. And my sense of being a good and worthwhile person is tied up with being a Unitarian Universalist. And I don't think I'm alone in that. So, it infuriated me when its racism was identified and criticized by the people of color who were in and around Unitarian Universalism. It infuriated me when my faith tradition was called to account. That's when the racial reckoning got real for me and personal. Now, if we step back, most of us have heard the news that the United States is a deeply racist, systematically oppressive society that holds white people as the norm and that values the circumstances and lives of white people as more important than the lives of others. White lives matter more. Now, we white people, all those among us here who identify as white, we've heard this news. We've been hearing this news for over 50 years or 60 years. And many of us now think it to be true in general. In general, except in that one place, that source of pride and pleasure that each of us draws our meaning and value from. Now, there's a warning that's given to ministers that says, don't go from preaching to meddling. And I think that's the line right there. It's a traumatic thing, isn't it, to have your most precious source of value and pride to be condemned as part of an oppressive system that abuses people, that is abusing people right now, and seems reluctant to really face up to that fact or reluctant to really stop all those forms of abuse anytime soon. It's shameful and it's traumatic when your little part of it, even if it's just your pride, is confronted. Your own personal racial reckoning is often heartbreaking. So at that point, the whole spectrum of human responses to trauma come into play: shock and denial and anger and bargaining before the truth could be accepted, especially when the material benefits of that unfair system are threatened. That personal racial reckoning has come, is coming. We see it everywhere in this society. This is not just something going on among us. Harvard just dedicated millions of dollars to exploring its relationship with slavery. This reckoning is coming to every person and institution in our society, but it's going to be real painful for those of us who identify as white. Because every tradition, every myth, every legend, every family story that sustains us as white people, as individuals, are part of that oppressive culture of white supremacy, even those parts that are progressive and well-intentioned. Because white supremacy is a system. And in a system, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And the part that hurts you the most is the part you love the most. Now, white supremacy doesn't say anymore that white people are better. It just says that white people are in charge. And it says that the institutions that white people created in our history ought to remain in place as they are, and those who are not white should fit into them. As I said before, it infuriated me when Unitarian Universalism was asked to reckon with its history and its assumptions. I mean, we were the good guys, right? Come on. We've always been on the side of African Americans. We have our stories of bravery and our martyrs, James Reed, Viola Luizzo. And when we look around and say, how come we're still such an all-white religious movement? Well, we think that's just a tragic misunderstanding on the part of other people who somehow don't understand how good we are. I won't present all the counter evidence to our collective self-delusion. We've been talking about it for 50 years. And seek out the voices of those people of color, black people, indigenous people in our movement, and hear the stories of their experience. We've been talking about this for over 50 years, and for many of you, I know, it only makes you angry. It did me. When I started to take this seriously 20 years ago, I was angry about that, and that anger colored everything I did within Unitarian Universalism for about a decade. It was my own, reckoning. I know you're not interested in the ins and outs of my career and the choices I made, but the question that finally emerged for me was, why was I so angry about this? Why did this critique hurt me so deeply? I mean, I knew it was basically true, but it still hurt. I was well-versed in critical race theory. I was well-versed in critical race theology. So what was going on? So over time, though, that knot of shame and rage loosened and relaxed. And I give a lot of credit to the actual practice of Unitarian Universalism in that process. Our spiritual practice as Unitarian Universalists is coming to church. A lot of us are occasional practitioners, but there are some among us who are so devoted to that practice that you can compare them to the monks in their monastery or the Buddhist teachers on the hillside. They come to church no matter what's going on. When the tongue-tied intern has given their first sermon, or when it's committee report Sunday, right? Or whatever it is. They come. They're faithful practitioners of our spiritual practice, our congregational worship. It's a weekly hour of a reminder, a weekly hour which reminds you of what's most important. It's an hour of reflection. It's the weekly practice of meeting people where they are. And with that loosening that came over that time, came in deeper understanding of the ubiquity of systemic racism. Because when you see it working in the institutions you love the most, you understand that it's a system and not just other people's bad choices. When you see that the system that you love the most, with all its progressivity and all its good intentions and all its earnest efforts, is still involved, is still part of that oppressive system, then you know that it's a system. It's not just other people with bad ideas or a bad worldview. So when we wonder why so many people seem to have chosen a path of anger and intolerance or even cruelty, it's good to remember that most people are reacting out of hurt pride, that what they love the most and depended on the most has been being questioned and criticized. And their pain is real, even though their denial is futile and their anger is misplaced. And for many, that knot of shame and rage will loosen, and they will get through their reckoning, as all of us are so painfully. As a society, we are experiencing the birth pangs of a new creation. What is being born is a transformed, multiracial, multicultural democracy with liberty and justice for all. It's what my German Baptist ancestors would have called the kingdom of God. Some modern theologians call for us to be citizens of the Republic of Heaven. But we call it beloved community, which is a term that came out of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, a pacifist group, and was popularized by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So what is the vision of a beloved community? In our hymn number 120, Turn Back, the words call for us to dream of a world made fair and all her people one. A world where all the people can come together because the world is finally free of all those systems of oppression and privilege that currently blight so many people's lives and divide us. A world of mutual respect and mutual care. If I were to sum up the history of Unitarian Universalism since World War II to the present, a period of time that closely matches my lifetime, I would say, and I'm going back to remembering what we talked about way back then in the mid-60s in my first Unitarian church in Youngstown, Ohio. Unitarian Universalism has evolved from being a liberal Protestant denomination whose ultimate value was individual freedom of conscience to being an interfaith religious movement whose ultimate value is the beloved community. From individual religious freedom to beloved community. That's the line we've been going. I'm going to repeat it. Unitarian Universalism has evolved from being a liberal Protestant denomination whose highest value was individual religious freedom. It's the church where you can believe whatever you want or need to an interfaith religious movement building beloved community. Beloved community isn't going to happen simply through marches, demonstrations, and voting, though all those are important. It's not just a political process, it's a spiritual awakening. It's where people come together in churches and congregations and learn how to live in a community that is not relying on oppressive practices to organize itself. We are, I hope, our churches are learning communities where we learn to live without oppressive practices. Just like we learned that to be an inclusive community, you have to do your restrooms right. And we learned that. And we're learning things now. We have to learn how to live in a community without oppression. And we have to be able to teach those skills, those life lessons to the community at large. And part of the way we learn is that we worship. This weekly hour where we remind ourselves of what is most important, where we sit in silence and we breathe and we sing songs that talk about wild and wonderful dreams. We need a space of reflection where we can loosen the knots of shame and rage that are binding us to the past. Where you stop long enough to let that voice come in and go, why are you so angry about this? What's got you so upset? The birth of beloved community is the overarching story of our time. We are living through the birth of a new creation. Never, never, never say that we are the resistance. We are living through the creation, and others are resisting the birth of that. But the process of birth is going on. Inevitable, inexorable. I've never given birth to anything. But people who have tell me once it starts, there's no stopping. What frightens us now is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb.
And now the offertory, I Send My Heart Up to Thee by Amy Beach, featuring Maria Kubier on soprano and Robert Winkley on piano. If you'd like to support the work of this church with a financial donation, you may write out a check to First Church Boston and mail it to 66 Marlborough Street, 02116. You can also donate via text. Simply text the dollar amount, 5, 10, 20, etc., to 617-917-5610. You'll receive confirmation by email. Thank you. Please feel free to join us live each Sunday at 66 Marlborough Street at the corner of Berkeley Street and Back Bay. If you'd like more information about programs, services, or membership of First Church, please visit the website www.firstchurchboston.org or send an email to office@firstchurchboston.org. I'm James Quixote McConnell, alongside Craig Hildreth, your announcer and broadcast engineer. Thank you so much for listening. We'll now return you to the studios of WERS.
I hear the real but far off hymn of the birth of a new creation. How can we keep from singing? My friends, thank you for inviting me to your pulpit. I will just remind you that there are powers at work in this universe, powers not made by human hands, made by all of our hands, and made by the inexorable process of new birth. That power will support you whenever you reach out for justice or peace, whenever you reach out to be the friend to the lonely, whenever you step out of your fear and into your courage. That power will support you, and you can trust that power. So go in peace and in courage and in hope. For a new world is coming. Be brave, be confident, and be filled with love for all you meet. Go in peace.
The worship service for the Sunday broadcast of First Church in Boston on Facebook for May 29th has now concluded.